Jesus is walking on top of what's causing them problem. Jesus is walking on top of what's contrary to them that they're in the midst of. Verse 26. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, and saying, "It is a spirit." And they cried out for fear. You know why they said that? Because they could not conceive that that could be real. They're down in the ship, tossed around in the wind, whipping everywhere, and that was very real to them. And they see Jesus walking on top of the very thing that's causing them problems. They see Jesus walking on top of it. Just piece of cake, just strolling along, no problem at all. And that can't be right. That can't be real. Look at us down here tossing around in the wind and the water and everything, aggravated, upset, and all this trouble. And he's just walking on top of it, just like nothing's wrong. That can't be right. It must be a spirit. It must, see, what they're saying is it can't be true. It must be a ghost. It must be a spirit. And they were troubled. Verse 27. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." These are such precious words. I wish you'd let these sink into your heart. This is what Jesus says to his disciples, especially in the midst of trouble, in the midst of things that are pushing and tossing and contrary, and they probably didn't feel very spiritual right then, those disciples. They probably didn't say, "You know what, Peter, let's just get out the Bible and have a Bible study." They probably weren't thinking that. They were probably trying to restrain their sailor talk. That's what they were doing, They probably were having a hard time. And here Jesus comes along, and here's what he says in the midst of all this aggravation and trouble. He says to them, "Be of good cheer." In other words, cheer up. It's me. Be not afraid. When he says, "It is I," means it's me. Or in other words, here I am. You see. Now, I'm talking to you today about the fact that Jesus is with us, whether we acknowledge him or not, whether we're aware of him. And I'm asking you next week to acknowledge him and see what happens. But he's with us. And see, if we could hear him, this is what he would say to us. In the midst of what tosses us, in the midst of what's contrary to us. Because let's just be real. In life, there's all kinds of aggravation, right? There's all kinds of things that rough us up and push on us and are not pleasant. It'd be great if it was just a bed of roses. I think that would be a jolly wonderful thing. But let's just be honest about it. But in the midst of it, if we could hear him, Jesus is saying and would say to you, if we were conscious of him, he would say to you, "Cheer up. Don't be afraid. It's me. Here I am. I'm here. What do you got to be afraid of? What do you got to worry about? I'm here." That's what he's saying to his disciples. Not just to them, but also to us. And sometimes I like to use this illustration. If he opened that back door and walked in this church, and he could do that. He's done that before. He could do that if he wanted to. And I always want to say this just to give him that opportunity in case one day maybe he'll do it. Open that back door and come in here. What would we all do? We'd,
He might come in the side door.
Yeah, he'd have to come through that door. That door is not very good shape. He'd probably use that back. Yeah, but here's what he would do. We would just be speechless, wouldn't we? We would be stunned. And we would just be sitting here speechless. And you know what he would do? Here's what I guarantee you this is what he would do. He would come up to each one of us one by one, and he would look you in the eye, and seeing you through and through, and knowing about your life and every detail and everything that you face and everything that buffets you and tosses you and causes you problems. And he would look you in the eye and he'd say, "Be of good cheer. Here I am. Don't be afraid." That's what he would say. Now, since he's not here, I'm saying it for him as his agent. I'm saying it for him to you. Don't be afraid. Cheer up. He's with you. Okay? So just take that to heart. These are good words right here. Okay, now here's the disciples. They see Jesus walking on top of what is causing them. He's walking right on top of the sea, and it's causing them all this aggravation and turmoil. I love Peter, verse 28. We criticize Peter for saying silly things sometimes, but he's really bold. I like what he says here in verse 28. Peter said, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water." In other words, he says, if it's really you, let me come to walk with you on the water. Well, in one way, he kind of puts Jesus on the spot, because what's he going to say? "No, it's not me, don't come." Because it is really him. But on a deeper level, what Peter is really saying here is, if this is really true, I see you walking in a way that I can't conceive of. I see you experiencing something I can't even dream of. I can't imagine what it's like. Jesus is walking on top of what's causing them all the trouble. What Peter's really saying is, if this is really real, let it be real for me and not just for you. Let me experience it too. And I think that's a good thing. You see, let me experience the same thing that I'm seeing is true in your life. And so in verse 29, he said, come. Really, he had no choice. Peter said, if it's you, bid me come. So he says, all right, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now, no matter how you cut it, Peter walked on the water. It wasn't just Jesus walking on the water. Now it's Jesus and somebody, one of his disciples, walking on the water, just like him. Peter walked on the water to go to Jesus. And I'm wondering, what's with those other 11? They're just sitting there. They're just sitting there scared. But Peter at least was bold enough to say, if it's true for you, I want it to be true for me. And did you know that's what the Christian life is supposed to be? What's true for him is also true for us. Because he has put his life into us. And not only that, but he invites us to walk with him every day. Every day we can walk with him. Now, Peter walked on the water to go to Jesus. Verse 30. Before he did that though, before he walked, just think about this for a minute. He was sitting in the ship and they're being tossed and everything. And he sees Jesus and he said, if it's really you, bid me come. And Jesus said, come. At that moment, Peter has to make a choice. Now, he could just continue where he was. See, he had to deliberately get up. Think about this. He had to get up and go to the edge of that ship and stand there looking at that water and looking at Jesus. I'm thinking he probably didn't even think about the water. He just said, all right, Jesus, here I come. And he just, here's why I think that. Look at verse 31. Immediately, the point I want to make is he had to make a choice to do it. He had to make a choice to walk. Yes, Lily, did you want to say something? Okay. And immediately, Jesus stretched forth his hand. Oh no, I skipped one, verse 30. And when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And he began to sink, and he cried, saying, Lord, save me. When he saw the wind boisterous, Now what was he seeing before that? Well, evidently he was seeing Jesus. Now, it says when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. Let me ask you a question. What's the wind have to do with it? Do you mean to tell me if it's calm enough, we could all just go walk on the water? No, the wind really had nothing to do with it. But Peter got distracted from Jesus, and he began to think about himself and his physicality. And I guarantee you, here's the thought that went through his mind. Wait a minute, what am I doing out here? Who do I think I am? Well, who he was, or who he is a follower of Jesus. That's who you are. We walk, when he had nothing in mind except Jesus, when he had nothing in view except Jesus, he was walking just fine. In fact, when he had nothing in view except just Jesus, he walked just like Jesus. Isn't that amazing? When he was just operating on the word of Jesus, Jesus said, come, and he went to walk with him. See, walked with him. He was walking just like him when that's all he was thinking about. But when he began to consider everything else, it says he began to sink, which is also remarkable. Is this still verse 30? Beginning to sink. Have you ever gone out to the pool and got in the water and began to sink? This is remarkable because he was on top of the water walking by faith, and as his faith kind of slowly drained away, he slowly began. That's really strange, isn't it? But it's by faith that he walked on the water. You see, and he began to sink, and he cried, Lord, save me. The next verse said, and immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him. And here's what he said. First words out of his mouth. Listen to this now. O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? See, the very first thing he said is, here's the whole issue. What are you doubting for? In other words, it was by faith that he was walking just fine. Now, why am I telling you all these things? Is it because I want us to go get on some water and try it out and walk? No, that is almost irrelevant. What's more relevant is the fact that we can walk with Jesus. And we can experience the same thing, the same kind of life that Christ has. And the same kind of walk that he experiences. Don't you know from reading the Gospels that Jesus had a really unusual kind of everyday life? Right? Well, Jesus, I think, invites us. It's not to say that he wants us to all go into the same kind of a ministry or something like that. But see, what I think is Jesus wants to walk with us in our everyday lives and make things real right in the midst of what we do in our lives. And right in the midst of what we confront, he'll confront them with us. And right in the midst of the people we rub shoulders with, I just sometimes think that Jesus would want to be a blessing to the people that are around us sometimes. Now, it doesn't mean you have to stop what you're doing, get out your Bible and say, hear ye, and preach a sermon. But you can be kind. You can be thoughtful. You can think about the people. See, when you're doing that, you are touching people with the life of Christ that's in you. He touches us, and we have the opportunity to touch people around us. But we don't even have to think about that. All we need to do is just walk with him, and he takes care of the rest of that. Is that all right? Let's all stand up today.